They were feared, revered, erased. For over 700 years, they ruled parts of Europe, built libraries, universities, bathhouses, and empires. But today, they've been reduced to a costume in a Shakespeare play, or a footnote in Western history books. Who are the Moors? Were they Arab invaders, African conquerors, Islamic zealots, or something far more complex? Because when history is told from one angle, it becomes myth. But when we tilt the lens back to Africa, something incredible begins to emerge. Long before the Renaissance lit up Europe, long before Galileo gazed at the stars, there was a world of black and Berber intellect, Islamic science and African kinship, standing tall across the Iberian Peninsula, and they were called the Moors. But let's clear something up right now. Moor is not a tribe, not a nation, not even a single race. It's a word used by Europeans from the Latin Moorus to describe the dark-skinned people who swept across the Strait of Gibraltar under the banner of Islam. But those dark-skinned people came from many walks of life. Berbers of the Atlas Mountains, black Africans from Mali and Ghana, and Arabs from Damascus and Baghdad. So when you ask, who are the Moors, you're really asking, who gets to write history? Because in the West, the Moors have been both erased and exoticized, turned into villains, side characters, or not mentioned at all. But this isn't a Shakespeare tragedy. This is history, and it begins not in Europe, but in Africa. Before they crossed into Spain, they came from empires with gold, with books, and with God. And what followed was a transformation that Europe has rarely acknowledged: the African-led enlightenment of the medieval world. In this documentary, we'll journey from the sand dunes of North Africa to the cathedrals of Cordoba, from the battlefields of the Reconquista to the courtrooms of Inquisition Spain, and we'll rediscover a people whose story reshaped continents, yet vanished from the textbooks long before the first Moor set foot in Europe. Before Spain, before swords, before minarets rose above Andalusia, the story began here, in Africa. Africa was never a blank space waiting to be discovered. It was a continent of civilizations, and at the heart of it all, the Berbers of North Africa and the empires of the Western Sudan. The Berbers, indigenous to North Africa, had lived between the mountains and the sea for millennia. They were traders, warriors, poets, and deeply connected to the land. Some had dark skin, some had olive skin, but what united them was their culture, not color. And to the south, beyond the desert, rose mighty kingdoms: Ghana, Mali, Songhai. These weren't just tribes, they were empires, wealthy, structured, sophisticated. They mined gold, traded salt, built cities with libraries and courts. And when Islam came, they embraced it, not as slaves, but as sovereigns. By the 7th century, Islam had swept across North Africa, and with it came new connections, faith, scholarship, architecture, and identity. The Berbers converted in waves, so did many West Africans. But they didn't lose themselves. They fused their heritage with the new faith. It's here that the African roots of the Moors truly take hold in the union of Islam, African intellect, and trans-Saharan power. So when the Moors eventually crossed into Spain, they didn't come as primitive raiders. They came as emissaries of civilizations. These were people who had already built mosques, mapped the stars, and debated theology long before Oxford or Cambridge existed. So, if you're still picturing the Moors as exotic foreigners, you're missing the bigger truth. They were Africans, learned, organized, diverse. While Europe was plunging into feudal darkness, Africa was illuminating its night with knowledge, gold, and governance. And in the year 711, that light crossed the sea, led not by an Arab, but by a Berber general with an African army. The invasion of Spain had begun, but it wasn't conquest alone. It was a cultural revolution in the was 711 AD, a moment that would change Europe forever. Not by crusaders, not by kings, but by Moors, and at the front of the storm was a man history almost erased. Tariq ibn Ziyad, a Berber general, a Muslim, and very likely a black African. He wasn't born in Arabia, he wasn't royalty, but his name would echo across continents. With just 7,000 troops, he crossed the sea into Spain. And when they landed, he burned the boats. Behind you is the sea. Before you, the enemy. There would be no retreat, only victory or death. In the Battle of Guadalete, Tariq faced Roderick, the Visigoth king of Hispania. The Moors crushed them. The Spanish monarchy fell within days. From that point forward, the gates of Europe were open. Within 7 years, most of the Iberian Peninsula was under Moorish control. Cities fell, but not to chaos, to culture. Spain was not looted. It was transformed. The Moors brought more than swords. They brought science, libraries, clean water, street lights, music, medicine. Things Europe hadn't seen in centuries. For the first time in centuries, Jews, Christians, and Muslims lived and studied together. Scholars translated ancient Greek texts. Philosophers debated reason and revelation. Agriculture boomed. Education was free. Women held power in the courts and schools. And at the heart of this new empire stood Cordoba, the crown jewel of Al-Andalus. By the 10th century, it was one of the largest cities in the world, with paved roads, running water, and over 70 libraries, while most of Europe still lived in dirt huts. This wasn't just Islamic Spain. This was African innovation exported into Europe. The Moors were not guests here. They built this. And they didn't just conquer. They ruled, they governed, they legislated, they established a civilization that would last, in some parts, for almost 800 years. Names you may never hear in a Western classroom. Ziriob, who revolutionized music and fashion. Al-Zarawi, the father of modern surgery. Ibn Rushd, whose writings inspired the European Enlightenment. For centuries, while the rest of Europe stumbled in superstition, Al-Andalus stood as a beacon of learning, tolerance, and beauty. But this golden age was not meant to last forever. The seeds of envy and religious zeal would soon be sown, and the same Europe the Moors had enlightened would turn against them. Every empire has its rise and its reckoning. For the Moors of Spain, glory lasted centuries, but decline came faster than they imagined. Internal divisions tore at the fabric of Moorish unity. Rival Muslim kingdoms began to fight one another, while Christian forces in the north grew stronger and bolder. The Christian Reconquista had begun, an unholy campaign to take back Spain. Not just land, but faith. One by one, Moorish cities fell. Toledo in 1085, Cordoba in 1236, Seville in 1248. The once mighty caliphates were reduced to emirates, puppet states, fragmented shadows of their former glory, and yet one city held out. Granada, the last Moorish kingdom in Spain. For 250 years, it resisted collapse, a flicker of brilliance in a Europe darkened by war. Even in its twilight, Granada was a wonder. Its poets wrote verses of sorrow and beauty. Its architects built palaces like dreams carved in stone. But in 1492, Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand united Spain under the Catholic crown. They launched a final siege on Granada, the city surrounded, outnumbered, and abandoned by allies. The last Moorish ruler, Boabdil, had no choice. On January 2nd, 1492, he handed over the keys of the city. He wept as he left, and his mother is said to have told him, "You weep like a woman for what you could not defend as a man." It was the end of Moorish Spain, but it was also the beginning of something darker. After the Moors came the Inquisition. Muslims were forced to convert or die. Libraries were burned. Arabic names outlawed. Even Moorish architecture was claimed as Spanish. Centuries of African, Arab, and Berber brilliance buried beneath a blanket of silence. Europe would forget what the Moors had built, but not what they feared. Their blood still flows in Spanish veins. Their words echo in the Spanish language, Oyala from Inshallah. Their legacy in math, medicine, architecture, music, lives on. History tried to erase the Moors, but we're here to remember, to reclaim, to say their names, and tell their stories. The Moors were not a footnote. They were a force, and though they were erased from the pages of history, their fingerprints are still everywhere. From language to architecture, from medicine to music, the Moors helped shape Europe's future while rooted in African knowledge and spirit. While Europe was drowning in superstition, Moorish cities lit up with libraries, universities, and observatories. They mapped the stars, performed surgeries, catalogued diseases, and introduced algebra. European scholars traveled to Cordoba and Toledo to study Moorish texts, often translating them from Arabic into Latin. Many of the so-called European discoveries were borrowed knowledge, filtered through Moorish minds. Their architecture wasn't just beautiful, it was mathematical harmony. They introduced domes, gardens designed with sacred geometry, and water systems still studied today. Even now, Catholic churches in Spain still hold Moorish bones beneath their marble. You just have to know where to look. The rhythms of flamenco, born from a fusion of African, Arab, and Gypsy traditions. Even the Spanish guitar has Moorish ancestry, descended from the oud. Thousands of Spanish words have Arabic roots, a linguistic legacy of the Moors. Oyala means hopefully, but its root, inshallah, God willing. But perhaps the deepest legacy is the one they tried hardest to hide. The Moors weren't just Arab, they were African. Black African generals, scholars, architects, and kings led Al-Andalus. Their bloodlines continue, though history painted them, white or erased them altogether. Today, Black and North African descendants across Spain and Europe are reclaiming that lost history. This is the return. The Moors were not just warriors, they were visionaries, and we, the children of that legacy, are still building. In their memory, we write, we speak, we remember. Because if we forget the Moors, we forget ourselves.